Welcome to the Mindspace podcast. I'm Joe Flanders. Thanks for tuning in. My guest today is Pascal Auclair, and you're in for a real treat. Pascal's a very well-known Dharma and meditation teacher. He teaches retreats all over the world and teaches locally with True North Insight in Montreal. Pascal is extremely knowledgeable about the Buddhist teachings, but maybe more importantly, he embodies the practice more authentically than maybe anyone I've ever met. Our conversation today touched on his background, how he got into practicing meditation and teaching, and we got a couple of interesting stories from some of the long retreats he sat. I got his take on how he thinks meditation really helps people live happier and healthier lives. I asked him what people can do to enjoy the benefits of meditation even if they don't have hours and hours and weeks to spend on retreat. I got his perspective on the secular mindfulness movement, including some recent challenges from the scientific community suggesting that meditation teachers should have better sensitivity to the mental health problems that can sometimes arise in meditation. And finally, I asked him about his commitment to social justice and how that shows up in his practice and teaching. You can find lots more info on Pascal at pascalauclair.org. And there's lots of info on Mindspace's mindfulness meditation classes at mindspacewellbeing.com. You can also visit presencemeditation.ca for info on the drop-in classes available at our meditation studio. Before getting to my conversation with Pascal, I just wanted to announce that for the next episode of the Mindspace podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Colin DeYoung. Colin is an old friend and a neuroscientist at the University of Minnesota, and he specializes in the study of personality. He's got lots to say about personality and well-being and mental health and all that kind of stuff, so really looking forward to that. Okay, so now let's get to my conversation with Pascal Auclair. Okay, I'm here with Pascal Auclair. Welcome, Pascal.
Hey, Joe. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
It's a nice setup we have here.
It's really nice to have you here. Pascal, why don't we start by you just telling us who you are? I know I mentioned in the intro that you're a meditation teacher and a Dharma teacher, but what does that mean exactly? What do you do?
That's a good question. Well, mostly what I do, Joe, is I go on retreat with people. That's mostly what I do is, so I'll go somewhere. Usually it's close to a city, an hour drive from a city in North America or in Europe, and gather with a group of people who signed up for a retreat, and they'll come and be in silence for maybe a long weekend or week-long or 2 weeks, and we'll be together exploring the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist practices, meditation. So in a way, I just do nothing with people for a number of days in a beautiful rural environment, and do this. I also teach in town, mostly here in Montreal, and so people come for an hour and a half class, and we practice. Just paying attention. It's an amazing thing. Something that really touches me, to be with a group of people and just pay attention. I think it's a kind of a strange and beautiful thing to do. Usually there would be, if you pay attention, it's because, in this case, ideas are being shared, or there's music, or a movie, or a play, or dance, and people come together and they pay attention to something, some kind of entertainment, we could say. And in the classes and the retreat, we come together, we pay attention, but there's nothing being presented except, our psyches and nature, the life of the senses. And it's quite remarkable that people can do that, come together and offer attention, offer presence to themselves and to the space almost.
So For people that are less familiar with the practice of meditation, why would anyone want to do that?
I know. This is so strange. I don't know. I've been practicing for 20 years and I'm still kind of wondering. But no, I do know. Because as we sit, let's say that's the form, as we sit and we pay attention, first the mind might pacify itself, like calm itself. And also we'll notice how the psyche behaves, what it does, So if you and I and the people listening to us, we were just to stop for a few minutes and say, let's do nothing and just pay attention. What would happen to us, One of us would start worrying about later, today, this or that. And another of us maybe would start thinking about earlier this morning or something of the past. And and so by just doing this, we notice what are our habits of mind, and are they really useful? Are they liberating or entangling is one of the ways that I think about this. And another thing that happens, I think, is a kind of a softening of the heart. So in just paying attention like this, there's something that opens up, some maybe appreciation for the quietness, or maybe compassion for the confused mind or agitated mind. We can be touched by the way we live. And that's quite remarkable.
Yeah, so I definitely want to ask you more about what kinds of skills and perspectives you cultivate in your own practice and you teach others. If it's okay with you, I would ask you first how you got into doing this in the first place.
Yeah. So there's two different stories, two different ways to tell what happened. So I'll give you both versions, and you'll see that it's somewhere in between or both. So in the first kind of quick, funny version of this is I'm traveling in Asia 20-some years ago with my partner at the time, adorable man. But we've been traveling for 2 or 3 months in India, Nepal, Thailand, and 24 hours a day together, 7 days a week, And at some point I just want a break, So I'm saying to my partner, why don't you go to the next place where we're, next city we're going to visit a couple of days earlier. I'll stay here. And then when I get there, you'll show me around. But it doesn't work. My partner's saying, no, we came together. We're staying together. And so I'm trying to find a way to have a little pause, And so we meet a traveler who just is coming out of a retreat in a monastery in the south of Thailand. And so she said, oh, you can go there. You'll be in silence for 10 days and they'll teach you meditation. So I just thought, in silence for 10 days. I'll be alone and we'll be together, we're all going to get what we need. So I said, Anthony, what about going there? That's a cultural thing to do. And he said, yeah, let's go. Free food, and also being curious. So we found ourselves at that retreat center, and I was able to be alone for a few days with him. And it was good for both of us. And after we sat a number of retreats in the years that came after it. So that's one of the answers. Do you want the other one?
Of course.
So the other one is a little bit more dramatic. A year and a half prior to that trip and that retreat, I learned, and I was 25 years old at that time, I learned that I was HIV positive. At that time, that year, there was no good medication yet. So it was definitely like a life, death sentence, is that the way to say it? And so, I was 25 years old, didn't have so many inner resources, and was very confused and afraid, and it didn't look really good. What was going to happen was, the loss of health, and, it was pretty bad what was happening with people with AIDS at that time. I had seen a few friends, get sick and die, and so this was the situation, And so I needed some help figuring out, like how to live with that disease and the stigma around it. And my self-identity was very shaken to the core. I thought I was youth, health, and eternity, you could say. And I was learning that I was none of these. And the uncertainty of life was very, very much revealed. I was really aware that I didn't know what was, how I would accompany myself in that adventure. So that was part of what led us to traveling in Asia. It was a choice to, I wanted to, see the world and live maybe more intensely, knowing that it was going to turn ugly, if I can say it like this. So there was this, so the call for like meditation, going on a retreat, this a sense of like there might be an answer there, no? You see monks and nuns with the shape, that these archetypes are really powerful. And to be in Thailand there and to know that there was something that seemed secret, some secret teaching, some secret ways to meet, I don't know, life, the mind. So I was curious about this, definitely.
Okay. And so you're saying the truth is somewhere in between. What exactly does that mean?
Well, how things are complex. I really needed the break from traveling with my partner, which I will repeat here is an adorable man. We haven't been together for many years now, but he's a good friend, somebody that is very dear to me. And so it's more like the dynamic of two people being together a lot. So this was true, and there was something, another kind of undercurrent, another thing going on where I was looking for, I don't know if it, some path, some tools, some way to understand. I think I was more than tools. I think maybe there was a sense, and people have that, I think, in them. Certainly others listening will some will recognize this, a different view. Look, like there must be another way to understand it, or another way to enter in relationship with such a stressful thing. Mm-hmm. And so this is a very, very deep question. So the annoyance on one hand and the search, the quest on the other.
And then how did that turn into you becoming a teacher? And what did you have to go through to be empowered by the Insight community?
Mm-hmm. So there was this retreat, and after this retreat, my partner and I were really were touched deeply by the practice, both the practice and the teachings, kind of what you could call the Buddhist philosophy, and also the actual technique of paying attention in a non-judgmental way to what is happening here now. So that kind of way to develop stability of mind and acceptance. I was really deeply moved by this. I recognized immediately that there was something in the technique and in the teachings, how the Dharma, the Buddhist teaching, talks about that there is difficulties in life. It's part of the fabric of reality that we are separated from what we want, that there will be aging, disease. All this I could hear in a new way, or like, to me, that was a new message. Prior to this, I had thought maybe that, if something went wrong, it was either my fault or somebody's fault. And now somebody was telling me, no, this is really part of life. And so it was opening the door to a level of acceptance that was extremely moving for me and healing. And so after this, we both had the interest to sit more retreat. And at the end of that particular retreat, the first one, somebody mentioned, so this was in the south of Thailand, near Surat Thani, at Buddhadasa Bhikkhu's monastery, Swan Mok. And there I heard at the end of the retreat somebody talking about a 3-month retreat. This was a 10-day retreat. Somebody was talking about a 3-month retreat in Massachusetts, like just next to where I live, Montreal, 5 hours drive. And I remember hearing this and recognizing, oh my Lord, this is my next trip. For sure, this is the next trip, the inner kind of traveling. And my idea was really clear. I'm going to sit this thing. And, it took almost 2 years, but I found myself maybe a year and a half later sitting the 3-month retreat at IMS. And then there was a few 10-day retreats like this over the year and a half that followed. Then the 3-month retreat. And then I was so interested in that practice and that study of human psyche. So my psyche, but also human psyche. There's something very universal that I understand in this practice. I'm studying human nature. And the kind of setup, I see it as a laboratory-like. So I'm going in this laboratory in the woods for 3 months, and I have all day, 14 hours a day to actually study the mind. And I have good guidance around this. So I did this, and I ended up over the years doing maybe 10 more of these.
You mentioned IMS, just so everybody knows, IMS being the Insight Meditation Society.
Exact. Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts, in rural Western Mass. And there, people who had sat retreats and had sat long retreats, Westerners, had created a center in the 70s. And they were offering the same teaching they had received from their masters in Burma, in Thailand, and they had organized that 3-month retreat where they would support you with food, lodging, and guidance in silence. And so so that's the place, which ended up being my training ground certainly as a practitioner, and later as a apprentice teacher or mentee, being mentored by Joseph Goldstein, one of the teachers there. And a number of these long retreats. Actually, 1 year, after a few years of practice, I had that dream. I wanted to do a year-long silent retreat. And being in the partnership with Anthony, we talked about this as a couple, and Anthony said, Pascal, it'd be okay if you went several times, 1, 2, or 3 months, and you came back, every... so that was kind of the compromise he was willing to do. So then I did my own compromise and did a year of sitting like I would sit the 3 month at the Insight Meditation Society, come back for Christmas. So I would be sitting from, September up till a few days before Christmas in silence. Go back home for Christmas, then maybe in February go sit 2 months in California, Spirit Rock Meditation Center, a center founded by Jack Kornfield and others. Same kind of situation, rural place where a bunch of people are together practicing. So I would go and sit there 2 months, go back home for a month or two, then go back to another retreat at one of these places or another place. After a year, I was so interested by the studies I was doing. I thought oh my God, it's the beginning. I'm beginning to calm my mind. I want, now my mind is a little bit gathered instead of scattered, and it's more laser-like, if you will. And now I'm starting to see things in a much more refined way, the quick behavior of the mind, all kinds of movements of mind and heart. Reactivity, judgment, self-loathing, self-aggrandizement, all these movements, and noticing the pain, the mistaken views that were behind these attitudes. And so I decided to do a second year, to which Anthony agreed. And so there was a second year of this. And at the end of these 2 years, of maybe 6 months of silence and practice, a year, Joseph Goldstein, the teacher at the Insight Meditation Society, and Jack Kornfield, the teacher at Spirit Rock in California, both said, Pascal, it would be good if you were to be trained to teach. So we'll do, Joseph said, I'll take 3 years 3 years with you and train you. And Jack said, I'll take 4 years, Pascal, with you and train you. And so I said, oh, but Jack is inviting me, Joseph, etc. And they talked together and they decided to create a group of trainees. And so they did a 4-year training with, we ended up being 24 of us being trained to teach, what we call the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings and practices.
What is it like to spend, months at a time in silence? I mean, it's very different from day-to-day life here.
Yeah. So the individual experience might differ. So I'll be representing my experience, For me, it was definitely an amazing blessing. You're in rural Mass. Let's say if we think of the 3-month, always happens at the fall. The fall 3-month retreat. And so you're in beautiful New England nature, lakes and forest, changing color. You actually have the luxury to watch the color change in the trees day by day. There's nothing else happening than that. And so nature is very powerful. The sun, the rain, time opens up. People cook for you. There's 100 people together in silence, so socially it's easier to be together, and at least for me, in silence. And then it's an alternation of sitting and sitting for 45 minutes of meditation, and then walking for 45 minutes in silence, inside or outside, and sitting again. Twice a week, you'll have a 15-minute interview meeting with a teacher. Basically, they're checking your practice, you're reporting. I'm reporting on what's happening for me. And they might give instructions, prescriptions, say, oh, be careful with this. And this, I remember, was really standing out because, I've been not talking to anybody, for 3 days. And then I have 15 minutes to actually have an exchange with a human being. And then I'm going back in silence. But still, I'm relational because there's 100 people. We have tasks to do, a few, maybe 45 minutes of work every day. So I maybe clean the pots and pans with others. We're in silence. But silence in this way is very much shared. So I actually was sharing a room with somebody we didn't speak. We didn't have the time to talk before the retreat started because maybe I came late or he did. So we did it 3 months in silence, and we developed a really beautiful friendship. He was really caring, waking up really early in the morning. He would sneak out of the room so I could sleep a few minutes more. And at night I would practice late. I would come and be really careful. And this had a really beautiful, we shared a lot. And at the end of the retreat, we talked and said, oh, in October, you got depressed. I was like, yeah, it was hard in October. And he knew, just from, body language and the way we move and etc. So, and all these hours of, discovering what it is like to be in a body, to be in a heart and mind, and the way the heart and mind can behave and create so much trouble for oneself. And the way it can also be so beautiful with itself. It can, calm and curiosity and joy and benevolence, friendliness. When it's there, the reality is so different. And this is amazing to discover that reality changes with mind states, in hopelessness and despondency, if that's a word, oh my God, I'm stuck here for another 2 months, and I'm people are building careers and having families and buying homes and participating in society, and I'm there, people cooking for me, I'm doing nothing, sitting on my ass all day, so that's a mind state. And another mind state is gratitude. Cannot believe I'm given this time to actually detoxify this mind, really take responsibility for what's happening in there, and starting to the word is not the right word, it's the one that comes to mind, to master, maybe just make order, clarify, how is the best way for myself and for others to use this mind, instead of cultivating self-deprecation or arrogance, what is the taste of humility, of true humility, so I really want to be there when it shows up. I don't want to be too occupied by other things. So that's the laboratory there.
We were speaking earlier about, getting together and paying attention. That's kind of what you're doing when you're teaching and leading retreats and stuff. This paying attention and all the things you're talking about that the retreat opens up for you. Maybe you can flesh that out a little bit or unpack what you're doing in meditation and how over time that helps people. And I don't know if we want to use the word sort of liberation or well-being, or so what are we actually doing when we're paying attention, and how does that end up being helpful?
It's a beautiful, profound question. There's actually many ways to answer this question, so I'll offer what comes here spontaneously. But so we just sit and we notice what's happening, and there's a chain of mental qualities that are developed as we do just this. So we pay attention. Paying attention, something will start to stand out, I'll notice either sounds or the quality of my mind, the impatience, the turbulence. And this is often in insight meditation. It's one way to describe this practice. The first insight we say is we notice that our minds are a little crazy. I don't know if that's okay to use this word in this way, but we'll just sit and say, let's pay attention to, just the quality of the air, the temperature, or the quietness in the room. And then we'll be, am I doing this right? I don't know if I'm doing this right. I should, and the mind this will be revealed, the tendencies of the mind. And so we'll get curious. So we'll go from being duped by our mind states to becoming awake to them. Instead of just believing, impatience, we'll start to feel the effect of impatience on the body, mind, right now, And if there happens to be some kind of quiet listening, then we might get interested in the kind of contentment that arises in just being there, attentive. Suddenly, I don't need to be somebody else, be further along. So it cuts through some illusions that I have. The illusionary, mirage-like nature of these beliefs is revealed just by that. For me, that's very powerful. So I sit there, like I think I have so many things to do today, and I should be somebody else, and this and that. And I sit and just pay attention, and suddenly it's full. And so when I go back to that belief or the things to do, maybe I'll be a little bit more free from the grasp of these thoughts, So I pay attention. Something will stand out, so it will activate curiosity in my mind. And curiosity in time will bring some kind of enthusiasm or contentment, something like this. And this will lead to the calming of the mind, that it was scattered and busy, occupied, preoccupied in all kinds of ways. The mind will calm because it'll be content, interested in what's here. And in this way, I'll see more clearly reality. So that's kind of a fast version I give you. The reality is much more messy than this. I get lost, doubt comes, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I'm losing my time. Da, 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 da. But slowly I get to clarify how I'm living, how I'm being. So that's one way to talk about this. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question on that. What's wrong with beliefs? Why this skepticism about reality?
Yeah. Beliefs, there's plenty of beliefs. They're I think they're useful until we discover that they're actually hindering, in a way, you know. For example, if I believe that something material maybe will bring me complete happiness, then I'll get really greedy. I'll want to get that thing. I'll be stressful. It'll create a feeling of lack, that completion, fullness is when I finally get this thing, you know. And it could actually play with my kind of integrity, values, ethics. Wanting this thing, believing that it's going to satisfy me, believing it so much, I might actually start, I don't know, lying to get it, or, you know, being rough to move ahead to get this thing. And once I get it, I might discover that it's not that actually satisfying. I don't know if I'm touching on something for somebody who's listening here, you know, but that relationship, that material thing, that status, whatever it is, you know, actually doesn't provide so much because it's still a little unstable. You know, so actually I want to work on these beliefs early on, you know, check out what I'm projecting on things. And so that's just an example. And so if I know deeply that there will be dis-ease, for example, in my case, I mean, in our case, there will be dis-ease, there will be sickness, yeah, then maybe I can actually take care of health, but I can let go of some of the fear that sickness will come, because it will come. And so then I can be freed from sickness, not because it doesn't happen, but because I'm not fearing it anymore. And this is deep stuff. Mm-hmm. And I can learn to live in this life. So for me, for example, with the HIV that we talked about, I could live, and I did live for a while under this belief that if I didn't have that disease, my life would be totally fine, you know. This belief, it seemed like it was telling me about happiness, you know. Happiness is not having this thing, which makes a lot of things very complex, you know. And that belief is stressful. I didn't know that. I thought, you know, it was that fantasy, you know, was helpful in my life. Like I knew reality. But actually looking at this, that belief is, I found out is not true. That I can actually be with HIV, this disease, you know, and meet it. And actually it's an amazing thing that is happening. There's nothing that's been a better teacher than this thing. And in terms of heart opening, in terms of humility, in terms of considering others, it's actually a really, really amazing thing. And so I find in myself that carrying the disease in this way is helpful for me, helpful for others. It's not like I don't take care of my health anymore. It doesn't, hinder that. I take really good care of myself. But I hold it differently. And by paying attention, I was able to clarify this. Oh, I'm not holding this well. You know, there's another way to hold this. That's kind of a revolution of the mind and heart we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a really nice example, a nice illustration of how you're bringing your practice to your experience. And I do want to ask you about a couple other examples in a minute. It strikes me in how you're talking about all of this, that you're not appealing to any spiritual beliefs. There's obviously no deities here. We're not talking about reincarnation. You're talking a very simple language, almost sort of psychological. Is what you're talking about Buddhist? Are you a Buddhist? Are you a monk? Like, how do you locate these teachings and what you do as a teacher on a day-to-day basis in the sort of traditional context?
Yeah. So I'm definitely not a monk because, I would have shaved hair and wear a robe. So listeners don't see this, but I'm in urban, lay person clothing. And I have a partner. I'm in a relationship monks and nuns are celibate. Yes, so not a monk. I'm a lay person. It's these in French. It's etiquette. These identities, labels. They're useful to some extent, but I can't say that I recognize myself. Like I wouldn't define myself as a lay person. I'm a human. I'm a person. I wouldn't define myself also personally as a Buddhist, although my behavior and thoughts and things I do really kind of indicate that I'm a Buddhist, But I'm not that interested in that, I'm interested in, well-being, in being a better whatever, son or a better neighbor or citizen, I'm interested in feeling more at ease in the world I live in and being able to contribute. So in this way, it's maybe more humanistic or something like this. It happens that the Buddhist teachings are awesome in this way. They really serve that purpose really well. And so I haven't found something, a body of teaching and practices that is so powerful and so it seems to me accessible, I don't feel religious. Others might and do, and it's good. There's many ways, I think, to meet and use these practices, and it's just for oneself to determine to does that answer a bit?
I think it does, yeah. So I want to ask you about a couple of the stories we've talked about. The first one, you're at home one evening, you've got whatever to do, you're sure it's a busy evening like any other. The phone rings, and it's some sort of customer service rep from Videotron. And, she wants to take up some of your time to review your file with them and make sure you're happy. And ultimately there is a business case for why she is doing this and using your time for that. And I think you mentioned just that, you were a little irritated by being interrupted in this way, and that you worked with that in a way that's, I think, quite unusual relative to how I might or somebody else might receive that call. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so first, I want to say that maybe I disclosed to you the best parts of my practice. And maybe I know that I'm not even, that it's more messy than this, and I get caught all the times in all different kinds of ways, in all kinds of situations, and it's not the best version of me that people, have to encounter. But in a case like this one, what comes to mind when I hear you describe this is, in the development of practice, there is, wisdom. What is wisdom? There's so many kinds of wisdom. And so there's one particular kind of discernment that we talk about in this practice, is the recognition for opportunities for practice. And so one of the ways for me, being triggered by not getting what I want sometimes in these kinds of phone calls, or as a customer of some sort, of some institution or corporation, I try to recognize the opportunity I have for practice when I'm on the telephone, for example, with somebody, or if I have to take a plane and the plane is canceled and it's messy at the airport. I'd like to remember, Pascal, this is an opportunity for you to practice your values, which I think you say to people, or like to think that you value patience, respect, care, clarity, all this. So I do want to live, I think, in a friendly world, so how do I do this? This is hard work in a way, but I'm happy that because of my practice of mindfulness, the word in the old language in Pali is sati. It's also translated as remembering. So what I'm describing is that mindfulness is also a way to remember my values. So at the moment where I would snap, you know, maybe I'm able sometimes, the times I described to you, I'm able to remember, actually I have values. I want to live in a safe world, you know, where I don't take any, you know, mindless moment to become abusive in some ways or rough, you know. And so and then that's what I find remarkable, is that often there will be suddenly some joy that comes in my mind. Opportunity for practice. It's my chance to create the world I want to live in, you know. So, you know, here I am at the airport. That's one of the latest opportunities that I had, you know, was, Pascal, there's a human being here, you know, you want clarity, you want to get what you need or stuff, but let's do this in a really work together, because that is possible, you know. And often when I'm able to do this, it's so smooth, and it's actually, there's a pleasant aspect to it, you know. And then it changes my experience inwardly and outwardly. And also, you know, I can experience another kind of joy, which is the bliss of blamelessness, as we talk about in the practice. So after, you know, an encounter like this, where I can say like, wow, Pascal, you stayed calm, you were clear, you know, it's not about being nice, you know, it's not, I just want to be nice and I want people to like me. It's not this. It's a deep recognition that we are in a world that is, you know, uncertain, unstable, unreliable. Things, you know, appear like they're going to go this way and they go another way. You think your evening's going to go like this, and then this happens, you know. And it's going to be like this pretty much for the whole ride. So how am I going to, here's an opportunity for me to practice not getting what I want. You know, and of course sometimes I don't have that sati, that remembering. I just have like the mind that, you know, contracts and reacts and, you know, and yeah, it's messy in this way.
The other story that I wanted to ask you about, I attended a day-long silent retreat with you. I think it was in November, December. And it took a lot of arranging for me to be able to go. So I have little kids, and I had to make sure that my wife had the support she needed to do what needed to be done on that Saturday. And I remember very well, it was like, I don't know, again, like late November, early December, and like we had a really rough winter, as people might remember. And it started already, like it was super cold, like unseasonably cold. It was even like snowing and even raining, and it was a miserable day. And I think I walked or I took the metro, and I was very preoccupied with all of the little things that were going wrong in my day. Like that I was cold, that it was tough to leave the house because my kids were, you know, in bad moods or whatever it was. I remember arriving and having to go up the stairs and take off my boots and being annoyed, like, well, if I take my boots off here, my socks are going to get wet. I'm going to have wet socks all day. And being very, in a silly way, triggered by these little irritants. And maybe there was some sleep deprivation in my defense. And then you showed up, and I think you sort of sat down at the front of the room, and you, I think, switched on a mic, and your voice was a little nasally, and you had this huge smile on your face, and you said, "Hi everyone, I just want to apologize. I'm sick. My voice might be a little off today." And again, there was this smile and almost a joyfulness in the imperfection of the moment. And I was just like, I don't know how he got there, but I want to be able to cultivate that kind of equanimity. So how does that work?
Well, I mean, for one thing, that weird kind of joy is like the life never behaves, the way we want. So that, in a way that makes me laugh is like, of course, the day I have to lead a day long with a lot of people, and is the day that I feel all, and so, and I'm touched by this, the fact that life is not gonna behave like I want, so it's a very humbling and, and I think with the practice, and it's that practice of mindfulness, of, daily practice and paying attention. Like I've noticed that having an opinion about things, wanting things to be otherwise, in the mind like this is not a good way for me. It's what we call in this teaching the second arrow. So the first arrow of the sickness that day, can't do anything about it. The Buddha apparently had a bad back, had something at his feet. One of his foot was hurt. That's the first arrow. You can't do anything about this. You take care of it, of course. But the second arrow, why me? Why today? I don't want this. This is really extra. And wow, the power of discovering that this is extra. And this is a whole layer of suffering that is pretty miserable and, painful. And this is extra. It doesn't have to be that. There's another way to go about this. And this we have to find in ourselves. So these 3 months, 2 month retreat, all this and, 20 years of practice, I'm starting to have some wisdom around that. Oh, this is how it is, Pascal, this morning. This is how it is. And having touched the experience in an experiential way, having touched the beauty, the feeling, the felt sense of compassion instead of grumpiness or... I've clarified some of that for myself, that I could add a layer of judgment and wanting it to be otherwise and despising reality or this or that. And there's a way where there can be tenderness. And there can be tenderness and accompanying. Oh, how do you accompany somebody who's sick and is going to teach all day today? So this. Another aspect that comes to mind is, so walking. You were walking or traveling from here where you live to that place where we were meeting. I was traveling too. So I've learned, my teachers have taught me to actually not give so much interest to the content of my mind, especially that kind of content. Like, why is it like this? Is it, oh my God, the winter, anticipation, projection, storytelling of all kinds. And so my teachers have been so generous and skillful to show me that now we're walking. What is the experience of walking here now? So that's mindfulness, paying attention to what's happening instead of the kind of fascination I would have for a series of train of thoughts that would be kind of miserable. And not helping me, not creative, not solution finding. It's more of a downward spiral kind of way of thinking. And so I know for myself, probably as I was walking there, I can't remember, but actually I do have memories of that day that you're describing. And I was walking there and I had a heavy pack because I had to bring stuff to implements, props and things. And I was just saying, can we pay attention to, the weight on the shoulders and the weight of the sick body, like the kind of feeling. And just, is it possible to be friendly with this, to befriend this, to make space for that? Because it's like this anyway. Is it possible to allow this to be? And maybe can I notice something else? The snow falling, wet, heavy snow that day. It was kind of beautiful. I could have easily missed it with my opinions and preferences, but to actually connect with that, and the wetness on the forehead or whatever, And so these are things I've learned to do. Yeah, so that's what comes to mind around this.
Another teaching that you raised that I think is really interesting and relevant is the tendency for us to personalize.
Yeah.
Oh, this is happening to me.
Yeah.
Why me? And the sort of the sense of luck or unluck, and the universe has it in for me, or okay, today is a good day for me and whatnot. And you often encourage me to address the sort of the conditionality of all that. I wonder if you can elaborate a bit.
Yeah, I'm really happy you asked, because to me that is so central. I have so much gratitude for this. I'm listening to your questions and I have honestly, really, I have tears coming to my eyes. And so there's the technique in mindfulness and Buddhist practices. There's the technique of meditation, and and the technique will lead us to change our views on things. And there is the view also that we can talk about even before we start the practice. It's the view is the kind of what I mean by this is the way we look at the world, the way we understand it, our understanding of what's happening. And so something that I find so incredibly powerful and beautiful in this practice is the view. So the view is what is happening right now. Yes, it's personal. That's one view, one way to hold it, and it's important to hold that view. And there's maybe another way to hold this, that this is human nature. This is the kind of things that happens to human beings. And so it's so in that the switch of view here is not so personal. So there's a reframing. Huh? So it's not that my bus is not arriving at the corner, why me kind of thing. Is being separated from what we want. This is such a human experience. And to me, what it happens when I do this, I change that view or reframe things in this way. It's very liberating in some ways. It's very touching also because the feeling I have is the first view was, the world is against me, or some kind of like the world against me kind of understanding. And suddenly with this new view, I'm welcomed at the heart of human nature. Like I'm at the center of it. Like welcome in humanity. This is exactly it. And so it's the birth of compassion for me. Look at that. Human beings, they want to feel good and they feel down. They want to be light and their heart is heavy sometimes. They want a person to call back and the person doesn't call back. They don't want a person to call and the person calls, And all these, my mind now has been trained to see a lot of the events of life like this. Human beings, And I don't want to kind of wash out, privilege of all kinds and, the differences that there are in society, around... the different identities we have and how it's valued in society or disvalued or rendered invisible. But I think it's also really useful to go to the universal aspect of being a human being, And so for me, it could be my story with my HIV, but disease happened to human beings, And HIV is one of them. It does happen to human beings.
It seems to me that in the time frame that you have been teaching, there's been a major change in how meditation is viewed in Western society. And I'm not sure I have the right expression, but I, sometimes talk about the secular mindfulness movement, particularly, as it exploded around Jon Kabat-Zinn and MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. I'm curious what your perspective has been on this major cultural shift and how you've experienced it as a teacher. You're kind of famous. You're kind of a famous meditation teacher, and you're, in a way, a beneficiary of this transformation or this movement. But of course, it may come with some downsides as well. So just what's your perspective on what's happened?
Yeah, it's I can tell you that I would never have I never saw it coming. So I was practicing because I needed these tools. I discovered that there were these tools. They seemed to be, they were not in the main culture at all. I would tell my friends I was going on retreat doing what I was doing, and there was not much resonance, and, in conversations with stranger, what do you do? I even before teaching, but when I started teaching, saying I teach meditation, end of the conversation, most of the time the conversation would just drop flat, with probably a label of weird, kind of new agey, no resonance at all. And you know, when I started to practice, I was the only person I knew was practicing in a way. Even here in Montreal, I was not aware of other people doing this. But to me, it was resonating a lot inside of me, and so I had to do it because it had sense. It made sense. It was helping me, really very applicable for me, really changing my life, the view I had on it, and the way I was holding it and living. And then when the offer came from Joseph and Jack to do the teacher training, it seems such like a weird kind of move to actually 4 years of teacher training to teach this thing that nobody's interested in and that doesn't make sense to anyone. But still, to me, and the way why I said yes was because I knew I would have 4 years of really high quality teaching, closeness to teachers, wise beings, and that, you know, I did it mainly for my own practice. Really, it was an opportunity for me to go deeper in my practice. But I didn't have the idea that actually people would come and listen. Like it would be very kind of rare and on the side, you know, very marginal. And then, you know, at the right time, where right at the same time as I finished my teacher training and started teaching, this suddenly, you know, John Kabat-Zinn was already there doing its thing, but it was really not really well known. And suddenly this wave, I still can't explain how it came to be, except that to me, in a way, it makes sense because it is such an amazing tool. I knew that for myself. I did, but I so didn't expect the popular culture and the corporation and the military and the, you know, prison system and the education and the University of Montreal and McGill, you know, to take it on. And in this way, it's I'm almost speechless. And in a way, now it makes sense, you know. Now what I see that I find I'm curious about, a little worried about, I don't know if it's maybe a strong word, but is there's a word for it, a verb for it, but you know, the way it can be used in all kinds of ways by people who don't know what this is, and kind of it's a trendy word now, mindfulness. And so I have friends who are psychologists, and they say that everything they receive in the mail, everybody's like mindful this and mindful that, and so if there is some of mindfulness in there, I'm happy, you know. But if it's just like a word that is used to entice people and it doesn't have the depth, then I'm really sorry, because it's a very, very powerful thing. I think all in all, it's a good thing, you know, and I think people are genuinely interested in learning about it, and those who want to teach it really want to teach the real thing, you know. Yeah.
Just be curious to hear your thoughts, you know, play social scientist for a second. Why do you think this has happened? Like, what do you attribute this wave arriving to?
Well, we are, you know, all on, or many of us, don't assume it, we want, human beings, we want to be more at ease, if that's the right way to say it, in our world. We want to understand better how to be inside ourselves and with others. And we have a sense that there's another way to do it, that we might not do it the best way, you know. And so when something comes like this that says, look, you know, it's kind of simple in a way. It's a simple practice that can have some efficiency to it, you know, some can really have an impact on one's life. I think that's interesting, that, you know, would bring somebody's attention. Plus people doing it, practicing, experiencing the benefits of it, reporting it to others, saying it, and, you know, and as a teacher, I hear a lot of these people telling me like that made really an impact in, you know, my divorce, or my with my health problems, or with the way I see things, you know, in so many ways. And yeah, it's also accessible. It doesn't need any props in a way. It's also part of our nature. We are beings that have attention. We pay attention. We know these tools. They're there. I think they're actually they were already in the culture, not just as valued. And people can recognize intuitively or naturally that, what's the best way you can be with a friend when they talk to you about their problems? To have opinion and judge them, or give them a space, allow them to be who they are. It's that easy in a way.
So your concerns about mindfulness being used as a marketing term is definitely part of the pushback that is gaining in momentum, I'd say. There was a lot of pushback, let's say, from more traditional Buddhist communities that were concerned about the practice being adulterated for commercial interests, and also in the scientific community that the data that has come out doesn't really justify all of the hype around the practice. And as you know, one very important figure in the pushback from the scientific community is Willoughby Britton. And she was just in Montreal, and I had her on the podcast, and she's kind of raised the flag on meditation and mindfulness teachers' sensitivity to mental health issues in the practice. So meditation can be risky, that there can be some adverse experiences that arise. And Willoughby's argument is that we really need to be very sensitive to what these adverse experiences mean, and interpret them in the appropriate way, and know when some kind of more formal mental health intervention is called for.
Yeah, unfortunately I was not there when she came to visit here in Montreal and offer teachings and the conferences and all this. It's maybe I'll start very, very broadly. Life is risky. Eating is a very risky thing. Not eating also, by the way. Breathing is an extremely risky thing. Sports are being a pedestrian, driving a car. It's inherent in life. Relationships, relationships can be healing, and they can create trauma in people, and so that's kind of a very large view that I have on this. And so, probably meditation too, retreat, so going on a retreat, meaning retreating from our life, our habitual stimulation and relationships, and going in silence is, I can totally recognize it's, I would advise, good mental health to do this, as, running a marathon, for example. It's not just like you dive into it, you have to prepare. And so around retreats, I totally recognize this. And so, I don't try to present, I hope I don't think I do present, for example, retreats as it's for everybody the best thing ever. That's much more tricky than this. So if somebody comes to tell me, I'm not sure, I hear you in the classes talk about retreat, I'm not sure, I totally want to honor this. To me, that might be a sign or something, and if I feel that people just need to understand what's actually happening in this, then I'll reassure in a way, But I would never want to say, this is what you need to do to fix you, in some ways, So it's a personal choice to go on a retreat. also try to keep it really open to people, and say, if after a day it's enough for you, or you see, that it's perturbating in some ways, and then you can always leave. And it could be a really wise thing to see, and people do that. Sometimes they realize, Pascal, it's not the right time for me to be here, too fragile, and then my job as a teacher is to help the person leave with a good sense, a sense that they made the right decision, that they take really good care of themselves, and in the classes, inviting people to keep their eyes open if they want, so it's not that as intense as it might be with the eyes closed, or to feel free to move, that they're not stuck in the body, move out of the room if they want, so kind of opening, so then people can make their decision and track themselves and see what's good for themselves. I think a lot of these things can be extremely helpful. I know in a prior conversation we had, you and I was telling you that I see on retreat, for example, that when we go beyond the threshold, is that the word here, of 45 people above, I find the whole thing is a little bit more unstable. Like there's anonymity, like people don't feel like, they might not feel like they exist so much. So, like I'm a little bit more less at ease when there's a higher number of people. But under 45, I think I always have a sense that we can create some kind of intimacy, some kind of people can feel seen, and I can see them, they see me, I know who's there. And I try to bring lightness, so some kind of playfulness or humor, and I feel like it discharge a lot of the intensity that it can build in a really wholesome way. Like it's not, it's discharging in a way that help us stay in the process. Tons of friendliness and compassion. And so like last week I was teaching and somebody was saying, Pascal, you're particularly kind of trauma sensitive in the way you talk. You're using a very invitational language. If you feel like, you could bring the attention towards your heart area. But if you don't feel like, you could stay with sounds, knowing that the heart area, the chest, maybe has more intensity of emotions there, So things like this, it's actually been working really well for me. Maybe I don't hear about all the stories, but the associations I have in my mind from my own practice, but also meeting hundreds of people a year, in classes and retreats, is that it's a very, very powerful, beautiful practice. So I do want to consider, the dangers but not in an alarmist way. Maybe I'm checked out in some way, but it's not been my experience. I've been in that field a lot. I spend a lot of time. I spend almost most of my time in retreat space with people, having conversation, talking about their practice. And sometimes there's a level of stress, that will come, when we touch, grief, deep grief, or, self-loathing, or... but the idea is to wake up to these mind state, to see, their erroneous nature. I'm thinking about self-loathing, or to learn how grief can be accompanied with amazing, deep, great compassion. And people find this all the time. So the reports I hear are a lot of this. That's what comes to mind now.
I think part of what's been sort of motivating Willoughby's work is this awareness that because meditation has become accessible to so many people, there's such a broad range of things that can show up on a retreat. And there's some question of, well, how does a meditation teacher meet clinical presentation, like dissociations, psychotic breaks, severe depression, panic attacks. How does someone with only Dharma training, in scare quotes, address these things? And I suppose I would wonder if there's a sense of like, Western, psychological science knows best about these things, which may or may not be true. But I do think it's important to mention that in all of your experience, you have met some of these, let's say, rarer, more severe presentations. And maybe you can just speak to that and how you meet them, and how your teaching invites you to meet those things, and to what extent it's different or similar to modern psychology, and how to reconcile these two perspectives. Like, is it wrong to do what the Buddha said, or what the Buddhist teachings say to do with these states, or does psychology have it wrong, or is there a meeting point between these things?
Many of the teachers I work with are actually also psychologists. And when I was assisting or teaching on the 3-month retreat, for example, we would have a bi-weekly meeting with a psychiatrist, and we would talk about a few people who were on retreat, and we were curious about, or worried about, and I think we try to be really out about it. We are really out about it. I'm not a psychologist. I've not been trained in clinical psychology, and that's not what I offer. I'm not offering psychology. It's a spiritual practice. And so, in my mind, these things are in order. I understand how this works. It makes sense to me. So if somebody comes with and we're getting trained also around this, it was part of the 4 years training, meeting with psychologists and learning about the different mental illnesses and things, and we ask people to disclose this when they come to retreat, and so we can work with it in the ways that we know. It's different. It's different angles on life. I see that a lot of psychologists actually come to retreats and classes and want coaching from this lineage, from this tradition. So there's tools there that I think are really good, and and there's a lot of communication between the different fields. So that's what I can see. I don't know if I have much else that comes to mind now around this. I wonder if we would want a priest, for example, in the Catholic Church to be a psychologist, if it would make sense. So it's kind of related, but different. Different. So the kind of knowledge that I've been exposed to is a very ancient, knowledge. And the way I've learned it is, it's not through going to university. It's a different approach. It's an old kind of system of apprenticeship, mentorship, tons of hours, and it's its own system. And it's the first time that I think, as you were in your question, you were saying that Willoughby. I'm using her first name. I've never met her. Don't know exactly what her teachings and research and stuff. But it's the first time I hear that there's this that Dharma teachers should have maybe a clinical background or something. It's a new thing for me, but and it makes sense. I understand how it would.
I don't want to misrepresent Wilby. I'm not sure that she would actually say that explicitly, but I do know that she advocates for mental health training for all teachers of meditation of all kinds.
Yeah.
I see this conversation about, let's say, sensitivity to mental health as part of a larger conversation about diversity in general.
Mm.
And I know you sort of alluded to it earlier, wanting to stay open to different experiences, the way some groups are either seen or not seen, and privilege and this and that. So how does that enter your practice?
Mm-hmm. So the Buddhist teachings are about suffering and the end of suffering. That's how, that it would be all about that, suffering and the end of suffering. So a part of this, as I was sitting the 3 months, or as I practice at home, a really big part of this is the suffering that this system called Pascal, this body, psyche, hormonal, everything system, how it creates suffering for itself, and how it can, with the same tools of a psyche and a heart and a body, with the same tools, it can create some kind of healing, maybe psychological healing or inner well-being, or something like this. And so a big part of the practice is to sit in meditation and in daily life to observe how the second arrow is planted in the heart, by one's own psyche. And so that's a lot of the Buddhist teachings is about this, to see how one creates trouble for oneself, and how we can untangle the tangles of the heart and mind. So that's one aspect. Another aspect of this, for me, very, very clear, I have no doubt about this, is that if I think about suffering and the end of suffering, I can see it really clearly, that a society is also a system. Like Pascal is its own little system. There's a larger system called society at different scales, but let's call it society. Society has in it a lot of tools to create suffering for itself or some members of it. And it also has everything there to create healing and support and visibility and safety and protection and it has everything to make people be the best of who they are and contribute. And so, as I'm interested in suffering and the end of suffering, so I'm very interested in how, in a systemic way, we create oppression. And how we create privilege for some of us, how we start valuing in overt and hidden or hidden for some of us, unknown for some of us, in ways that and so to me that's it requires the same tools. So in the sitting practice, I learn how to quiet the mind so it can really feel reality instead of being agitated by its preconceived ideas. How I can slow down and pay attention so that I can see really what's happening in my heart and my mind. So what I need is quietness, calm, some kind of calm, stable mind that is very curious, honest, courageous, investigative. And so these qualities, I think, are the same that are needed to look at society and how it produces well-being. And so it needs what? To go underneath my ideas that we're all equal. I might say, oh no, it's all equal, it's all the same, It's like, well, but if I look a little closer, I'll see that we might all be equal in thoughts, but in treatment, it's not exactly what's happening, So I need honesty, I need calm, curiosity. And so for me, teaching mindfulness is giving us the tools to address the issues of sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, fat phobia, transphobia, homophobia, all the ways that we elevate some of us and put down some of us. And so I'm interested in that. So I'd like my practice and the teachings that I do to serve that goal of protecting human beings, you know.
I'm mindful of the time here, and we've been going for well over an hour. Maybe one final question, if you're not too tired.
No, please.
This kind of clarity that you have and these habits and skills you've cultivated over many, many years and many, many, many hours of practice, you certainly seem to embody some of what you teach, and the well-being seems evident just in looking at you. But not everybody has time or the values or the interest or for whatever. I mean, of course, it always becomes a question of choice to some extent. Like, okay, I can just spend the next 2 years on and off long retreats. But what do you say to people who want to move in that direction, but for whatever reason can't take that big bite of practicing in that way, at least at the beginning?
Yeah. I don't think it's required to do like these extensive, I mean, maybe to gain like, you know, some, with Ajahn Chah, you know, a famous revered teacher in this tradition said, you know, something like, let go a little and you'll have a little peace. Let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. And let go completely and you'll experience complete peace. So what I see when I teach classes here in Montreal, people who might never come to retreat, or maybe once a year, a weekend, you know, that they gain a lot from this practice. That's mainly what I see, you know. Even some people will come for a few months to classes and then they disappear, and I might see them in the street, you know, and often they'll be thankful, you know, and say, you know, 2 years ago I was coming to your classes for a while. You know, it was really, really valuable. It had an impact on my mind, you know, and the ways that I live, you know. And so this I see all the time. People will come to one class, you know, and they'll get a little hit of something, and I see it in their eyes, you know, and they'll linger after sometimes, you know, when class is finished, just to say thank you. And that thank you is not, it's personal. They say thank you to Pascal, but it's thank you to the practice and the view that is presented, and the technique, the suggestion of just paying attention, not being so faithful to our ideas that this is so important and I want this and I want to get there, you know, and to actually abandon this for just a moment and feel what is here. And just in that little thing, a second, I sense that there's a lot there. And so it doesn't have to be a big amount. I think there can be an impression in the mind, because it's something of quality we're talking about. So it leaves an impression, and we might forget it. But you know, Jack Cornfield, my teacher, was telling this story where he said, you know, he met a man came to him in the airport somewhere in the United States and said, "Excuse me, are you Jack Cornfield?" And Jack said, "Yes." And he said, "I just want to thank you because, you know, I practiced with you in 79, you know, like 30 years ago or 20 years ago or something, you know, at that point." And he said, I just did that weekend and forgot about the whole thing. But last year I had a serious heart problem. And while I was being transported to the hospital and entering the surgery room and all this, I remembered I should maybe just be with the breath and the body laying down, you know, and not, you know, depart in my head about, like, just stay here. I said it made such a difference. I want to thank you. So, you know, there was a 20-year gap of not remembering, and still it was valuable that weekend. That's the way I see it.
That's a lovely story. So how can people practice with you?
Oh, yeah. So, you know, there's a website called pascalauclair.org, And you can go and see on that website, mainly what is there is the teaching schedule of retreats. So you can see the opportunities there and the classes in town. And also there's audio and video teachings. So these are all ways to practice. And so I'm here and there. It's possible to come. And the organization we founded here in Montreal is called True North Insight. And it offers a whole catalog of retreats with different teachers, all really good teachers in this tradition and lineage. And so, if it's not with Pascal, it could be with Daryl or Jean or other teachers that are well trained.
Okay, Pascal, thank you so much for doing this, and it was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Joe. And I know your heart is in this is very beautiful. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Mindspace podcast. The purpose of this project is to inspire people to cultivate well-being. The science tells us that well-being is best understood as a series of skills and habits that can be learned and practiced. And I hope listening to these episodes helps you move forward on your own path to well-being. If you enjoy listening to the Mindspace podcast, please share your favorite episodes with friends, family, and colleagues. Thanks a lot.